Okay, good morning everyone. So yeah, thanks. We're going to continue on. I'm going to be talking you through kind of how to leverage PKS and Kubernetes to start thinking about moving your portfolio of applications, modernizing them, and getting them running using containerization and PKS. And so we're going to talk through kind of a bit of background on the kinds of workloads that you might have within your enterprises today. We're going to then talk about some techniques to look at profiling and finding the right kind of workloads to run on PKS. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the methods that you could start looking at and some kind of tools in the industry that can help you really accelerate this and just the basic benefits you're going to get from leveraging Kubernetes and PKS.
Alex, it's a little hard to hear you in the back. If you could hold the
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so yeah, I work within Pivotal, working on application transformation. So we've been doing this with the Pivotal application service, so Cloud Foundry, for several years now. PKS is really cutting edge, really new, and so we're just starting to see the first wave of customers going through this. And so let's get in and look at the kind of workloads. So at the moment, based on what you're trying to achieve, you will look at choosing these different types of technologies. So this could either be a packaging technology or a way of running this workload. Just curiosity, how many people are using containers today to package their software? Okay, 1, 2, okay, 3, that's a good start. Okay, so yeah, based on this, you're going to have some choices. It might affect the way you operate this software. If you're doing event-driven functions, this is going to change how your operations team would run these. If you're using monoliths, there's all different kinds of monitoring and kind of security requirements based on these different technology choices you make. So really, what we're trying to do is figure out, for these different workloads, where's the right place to place them? Where are we going to get the most return on investment, and where are we going to be able to meet our kind of goals, right? So if you have, depending on your business goal you're trying to achieve, you might be choosing a different technology layer. So let's say, how are we going to match these different kinds of workloads to these different platforms? And so the kind of 3 platforms that we're thinking of, as Cornelia mentioned, kind of the container orchestration layer, which is one of the lower levels of platforms where you get kind of a high level of flexibility. You can use primitives that we have for networking, for doing routine logs and metrics. So you really get kind of all the knobs and dials. So you can really do something custom for your specific application. This requires a lot more effort on your development teams because they have to worry about a lot more. So this is when you move into the next level, which is kind of the application tier. And so this is focused, and primary focus is developers that just want to focus on their applications. Most application platforms leverage these container orchestrators, but they have these opinions baked into them. And those opinions allow you to go faster. As long as you agree with those opinions. This is one of the tricky things with application platforms. So looking at kind of some of the characteristics you get from application platforms, you get kind of layer 7 network and routine. You've got services for logs, metrics, monitoring. You often have services marketplaces, so you can easily consume other services without having to actually run those yourself within your platform. And it often fits into these enterprise environments because you can put things around quotas, team policies, and kind of add that kind of enterprise grade capability into the platform. And then application platforms will often run serverless functions. And so this is where you can do event-driven functions. And this is often layered on top of an application platform. And so, like we said, you get lower complexity and higher efficiency the more you go to the right. And as you go to the left towards the container orchestrator, you get that flexibility, but you lose some on the standardization. So that's the kind of trade-offs you're making when you go around the scale. So another way of looking at it is this kind of onion diagram. And really, strategically, you need to be thinking, how can I get from the bottom of this onion right to the top? And this is going to give you those kind of productivity gains, lower the complexity for your developers. And it's really a question, though, of where do you get started? But most enterprises now have a huge amount of applications that you're running. These are generating business value, right? So you can't just say, okay, we're going to take our main website offline and rewrite it into serverless functions. That might not be a viable starting point. So often most people get in this position where they're kind of frozen because they have all of these choices to make and they have a huge portfolio of applications. And so where can you get started in this landscape? And so you've got to think about, what challenges do you really face with your applications? Are you having problems with the development? So this kind of greenfield day one, let's build it. And this is really looking at kind of how you develop the software, how quickly you can get through those iteration cycles, how can you test it in a repeatable, reliable way, and then how can you put these into pipelines? Are you able to automate the software delivery from when someone writes that line of code to when it's delivered into production? How long does it take you to set up environments? That's another thing we find. Developers kind of spend huge amounts of time tearing down, waiting for environments to come up, requesting VMs from the IT team. And this is all kind of the day one greenfield challenge, we'd say. Day two gets even more complex because that's when people start using your product. So you have to make sure it's patched. You have to make sure that you scale on demand. You have to be able to upgrade your app, right? So when you write new app code, how can you do that with having zero downtime? These are all things that you'll be expected to do because you probably can't take your main application offline halfway through the day for 2 hours. And that means your developers have to come in at night, operations, it just gets a bit complex. And so really the brownfield environment, which is this kind of day two picture, you also have the challenges of day one because you're often trying to still enhance this application. So there's lots of challenges that teams can be having. And so you really want to be looking at what are these challenges and how do you map them back to this kind of where does it fit into this stack and where can you get the quickest return on investment? Okay, so really I think containers are really a great starting point for modernization. There's a huge amount of workloads that really fit into the container model. And if you look at what it did back into, going back to the shipping analogy, it really gave just enough standardization to get some quick efficiency gains. You get cost savings from improved utilization of space, and then you also get this kind of same way of doing things through the efficiency. And so containerization can be a really good starting point, especially in big enterprises with large portfolios. Okay, so really, where do we get started with this kind of modernization, especially looking at how we can leverage PKS? Okay, so two terms we're just going to quickly talk about. We've got replatforming and modernization. And so when we think of replatforming, this is really taking something that's initially running, it's already running in your company, and thinking, how can we do just enough modernization to get it working on something like Kubernetes? Okay, so we get a chance to revisit some decisions around the greenfield, how the CI/CD is done, how does this look in this new environment, and really how can we get some quick wins through the platform capabilities. This might be reduced operating costs, could be improved speed to scale. Modernization, on the other hand, this is really how can we leverage all the cool stuff that these cloud platforms give us. How can you do auto-scaling, auto-healing, things like cloud-native design patterns. And so this is really taking something and fully modernizing it. So we really see the first starting point being replatforming. So how can you just get moving? But what kind of workloads are suited to replatforming? Okay, so thinking stage one, let's identify candidates for PKS. So we do this exercise that we call Bukka Scene. So I'm going to share the slides afterwards with you, but this is a cool technique where you can start to figure out which things might be suitable. So bucket one is really ISV products, things where you don't have the code. We also have middleware. This is similar. You might not have the code, you might just be doing some customizations. Bucket 3, 4, and 5 are really in-house custom things. Might be using .NET, might be using modern Java, legacy Java. And you're thinking this is where you'll get lower levels of modernization needed. And this is, on the left-hand side, good candidates for replatforming. Okay, so here's quite a complex diagram. But we're going to make it simple. So really, this is thinking of technology fit and strategic business value. And so technology fit, we mean how well is this application suited to be running in a cloud platform? And so on the other axis, how much business value do you get from this application currently? And so we think the more business value and the more technology fit, you should be looking up in this quadrant is really where PAS, so Pivotal Application Service, Cloud Foundry, kind of is worth investing in. If you're doing things like stateful services, stateful data services, vendor container images, Dockerized or stateful things, or really things that you don't really change very often, these are some great initial candidates for PKS. Anything really that's not giving you this value, so we call it the red zone here, you really want to think about, let's not invest in there right now, or maybe let's even retire this because it's not adding much value to our business. Okay, so we're focusing on this area, looking for these stateful things, container images already. These are going to be prime candidates to just move on to PKS, and you're already going to start seeing some big return on investment from this. Okay, so that moves us on to how do we really assess return on investment? Because often in enterprises, to do any work, you need a budget, and to get a budget, you have to show return on investment, has to be a business case behind it. And so how can we look at using some of these things to drive some innovation in the technology layer? And so how do we think about return on investment? We think of it in terms of 5 things. We think stability, speed, security, scalability, and savings. These are some really easy to think about buckets of kind of return on investment factors. And so scalability might be an example there of how quickly can you scale. You get a load of traffic that comes to your service. How quickly does it have to change before you can start serving that new traffic? And in terms of stability, how often is your service going down? How often is it overwhelmed by traffic? Security, Cornelia mentioned lots of stuff you get with PKS in terms of security just by having that embedded OS. And so you can get some quick wins there and really leverage PKS to get these benefits in terms of security. And savings is obviously a huge one. If you're running on bare metal, the efficiency gains you can get versus running in containers can be huge. Also, think of taking out other kind of licensing costs of running on VMs, or you might be paying middleware vendors extra money for support, and moving to something like PKS can actually drive some savings in your business. Okay, so how do you actually think about taking these and then packaging up in terms of we're going to do 3 to 6 months of investment in an application? And so we use a framework called OKRs, which is objectives and key results. And so you frame these objectives and key results around your return on investment metrics. And we often see people will make these kind of metric dashboards where you can be tracking and monitoring how much have you improved by leveraging something like PKS or PAS. And this gives you the ability to go back and demonstrate the results you've gained through doing this technology changes. And so it's a great way to justify back to your business that, hey, we are making change and it is really valuable to both the business and our customers. Okay, so we use this model from Gartner, it's called TIME. So this is the tolerate, invest, eliminate, migrate. And so again, this is kind of using the 2 axes of business value, how valuable is it to our company, and technical quality. So how good a shape is it in? How much investment are we going to have to make to get it to run on something like PKS? And so when we think of tolerate, this is kind of the sector where it's not great, it's not really important to us to change right now. So let's just kind of leave this alone. The next sector of invest is, okay, this is obviously very important to our business, and we've got some kind of level of technical quality, so let's keep on investing in that application. Migrate, this is where it's valuable, but the technical quality is not great. It might be provided by a vendor, might be packaged a container already, so there's not too much you can do to change that application. So those ones might just be the candidates. Let's do just enough modernization, lift it, shift it, put it onto something like PKS, and you're going to get those savings in terms of cost savings, operational efficiencies. You get the speed benefits of, it's much quicker to create a container than it is to, request a VM from IT. And so you're going to get some savings there. But this model works well when you also start to layer on risk. And so you could say, okay, this is a medium-sized application here, but it's kind of a priority 1 business application. And so you want to be careful when you're moving these kind of apps. Because if they could have a real damaging impact to your business, you've got to think, do we really want to migrate this on first? And that's a good question to ask. We always think, let's pick something simple to start with, because everything around it is complicated. If you imagine just how long it would take you and your business to get Hello World app. So you write Hello World in Java, your language of choice. How long would it take you today to get that into production? We've heard some customers who have 31, 32 steps to get into production. And so often the application is not the problem. Everything around it is complicated. So by marking these things in terms of risk or how complex this might be, it'll give you a guide. And you can almost use this as a map. So once you've created this, it doesn't take that long. You just need a few stakeholders together, and you can start with a handful of apps and then plot them. So if you have thousands, you might say, let's take 50, let's take 20, let's take 10, and map this in this model. And then you can identify where we should be investing first. And that's the key thing, is you pick something and then you get started. Okay, nicely, get started. So that's the key thing here is like, you don't want decision paralysis. You don't want to be waiting for months to do something. You don't want to do a 6-month portfolio analysis and then another like 9 months of deep dives. You want to pick some things and start taking advantage of this now, right? So one of the things we think about is we've gone through this process. So you've ran through, you've picked your kind of applications that might be suited onto PKS. So you've looked at that chart of how valuable is it and how's the technology fit for cloud native. Let's say you found a few vendor products where you have Docker images for, maybe they already have some kind of Kubernetes installation process. Or you might have an application you don't touch often, it's stateful, you just want to kind of put it into a container, get it running, get some of the day 1 and day 2 benefits that you get from PKS. And so again, we say start simple, pick a few ones that are smaller, pick a few of your very simple things, and then try and build a pipeline around these. And so the end goal is production, right? Like there's really no value of doing any of this work unless you're improving your developers' experience, and a platform for developers, as Cornelia said, is production. That's production for them. So you're thinking, how can you automate this all the way through from taking that application, using things like Harbor or image registries to create and build the images? How can you put this into a pipeline? How can you store the artifacts? How can you automate some of those security processes? How can you get sign off on those 32 steps? How can you turn those into 20 steps that are all automated? And so these are the things you really need to focus on, is getting that pipeline to production. Because when you're in production, that's where like you really realize the value of what you've done. And so this process, typically, you'll be looking at 5 to 10 in 10 weeks if you can get this automation down. And so you try and leverage the automation as much as possible across your portfolio, and try and think about, taking notes. Each time you put an application through, write down, how do we do that? Where do we get stuck? How can we share that knowledge within our teams? So a really quick win. Is anyone familiar with Helm or tried Helm on Kubernetes? Okay, we've got a few people. So this is an interesting concept of, they call these Helm Charts. And we're going to hear a bit more about this in the demo later. But the idea behind the Helm chart is it's a description of how to run this software on Kubernetes. And so this has taken the hard work of figuring out, okay, we need to be using stateful sets here. We need to use a Kubernetes deployment. We need to use a replication controller. These kind of decisions have been thought about by someone else, and they create a Helm chart. And this says, okay, take this collection of images, get them running on Kubernetes, and it needs to look this way and have these operational factors. And so I'd really recommend looking at Helm charts to leverage what the community has already built. And this is like your common things like running Mongo, running Redis, running Cassandra. These Helm charts will kind of bootstrap you and can really accelerate. Sometimes they're supported by the vendor. And so if you're using a packaged software today, say really go talk to that vendor, talk to the supplier and say, do you have a Helm chart? Do you have a Docker image? Do you have something to bootstrap me in my process of getting speed? Because we want to do this quite quickly, and the more you can work through your portfolio to first re-platform, you can then leverage this investment and say, okay, we've re-platformed 50% of our portfolio, we've saved this much, we're this faster, we've got more stability, let's invest some of that money into innovation and to kind of modernize these applications. So that's where you can take the next step and looking at leveraging the next level of platform features. And finally, we're going to see this in the demo later as well. But this is really showing you what it could look like. Some example use cases here. You might have your kind of modern cloud native Java stuff running on PKS over here. And then in Kubernetes, you could be running things like stateful data services or things like Elasticsearch to kind of push your metrics and logs and things into here and do some kind of interesting processing. And so you could get a Helm chart for Elasticsearch, have that up and running in minutes on your Kubernetes cluster, then wire up your applications to be pushing information over to your Kubernetes. And so this is kind of trying to show you how they can work hand in hand to really get the benefits of both. So going back to the workload point, this is really, where should this workload run and what benefit will I get from it? So just like a quick recap of some of the things we talked about. This was identify the candidates. So do a bit of profiling. Don't spend too long on this. Start simple, start with 10, 20 apps, profile them, figure out where you want to invest, where you want to migrate. You then take this list, And then you do a kind of ROI assessment. So you look at some of the benefits you get from the platform. Let's say PKS, if your main driver was, we really want to improve security and reduce costs, you can then go, okay, for this application, how much would we save if we moved it over? And what would be the return on investment for doing this work? So you build your business case, then you can get started. And yeah, definitely leverage the community, leverage products that have been given to you by vendors that are already packaged as Docker images, already packaged as Helm charts, and really get started with moving that, create the pipeline, get in production, and then yeah, that's it. So thank you very much.